All right, I'm seeing it's 10:02 on my screen, so in the interest of time, I'm going to get us started this morning. Thank you so much for joining us early today on this Friday for the next session in our intersectional webinar series. My name is Danielle Hubley, and I manage advocacy and education with the Partnership for Strong Communities. We've learned so much throughout this series, having conversations with advocates and leaders from other sectors, exploring the importance of safe, accessible, and affordable housing to everyone and the impact that it has on their work. I'm grateful to be in community with you all today for another important and informative learning session. For some quick housekeeping, today's session is being recorded and it will be published to the Partnership's YouTube channel within the next week or so. If you have any questions, please use the chat box at the bottom right-hand side of your screen to add to today's conversation. We're also going to have some questions that come from our panelists, so we'd love for you to have a dialogue with them. We'll probably share those questions in the chat and encourage you to respond in the chat, and we'll use the Q&A time we have at the end to uplift anything that came out of those conversations or any outstanding questions you still have. But please be a part of the conversation and share your questions, your thoughts, reactions as we move through it. So with that, let me introduce you to the Partnership and why we're hosting this series. The Partnership promotes equitable change in Connecticut housing policy by coordinating advocacy, advancing research, and uniting diverse partners. And our vision is that everyone in Connecticut has a safe, stable home that is affordable to them in an equitable community of their choice. We believe that housing is a human right. As such, in January, we released the State of Housing Report in Connecticut for capturing data from 2025 and prior. The goal of this report is to bring visibility, clarity, and accountability to the housing challenges and opportunities within our state. It's a really great primer on the landscape of housing in Connecticut, and I'm only a little biased, but it is 1000% worth your time to check out and take a deep dive into and find what is most important to you. There's tons to digest in there. So we know that a healthy housing system necessitates a comprehensive approach which intertwines housing affordability, housing creation, housing choice, and housing stability. People need to be able to afford their homes while meeting their other basic needs. We need more physical homes, period. We need different types of homes for people to choose from in all communities across the state. And most importantly, people should have the right to safe, stable homes and be supported from the experiences of housing instability, like eviction and homelessness. This is how we weave a housing system that prioritizes the needs of our residents and one that supports strong families and strong communities. This year, our series aims to highlight and focus predominantly intersectional work around advancing housing stability. But even our priority areas regularly intersect with one another, and we often are exploring themes across all four of these buckets in our conversations here. So stability is a theme we'll talk about today. Certainly affordability will also be something that comes up, and elements of creation and choice as well. So when we're thinking about housing stability, though, we know that it's closely linked to outcomes in health, economic security, mobility, child development, and educational attainment. Yet many Connecticut residents experience housing instability manifesting like couch surfing, homelessness, evictions, and foreclosures. These challenges have lasting impacts that go beyond the immediate loss of shelter, undermining families' ability to regain stability and making it harder for children and adults to thrive. So what is intersectionality? Intersectionality refers to the interconnected way social categories like race, gender, class, and ability shape the opportunities and experiences people have throughout their lives. These personal intersections are also reflected in the systems which surround and support us, particularly when it comes to the homes that we live and grow in. Housing isn't just a product that can be bought or sold, it's the foundation of our livelihoods and means so much more to us than just being a roof over our heads. The partnership strongly supports expanding the reach and accessibility of the rental assistance programs that are available to support people in affording their homes and remaining stably housed. An element of that work has been centered around understanding how many rental homes are available that meet the payment standards for federal and state rental assistance programs. The general rule around determining housing affordability is that households are not spending more than 30% of their annual income just on their housing. Connecticut's rental assistance program, sometimes you'll hear it referred to as RAP, bases its payment standards on the maximum allowable rent, or MAR, published by the Connecticut Department of Housing. The payment standards for Section 8, which is the federal rental assistance program, are based on fair market rents, which are published by the Department of Housing and Urban Development. To spend no more than 30% of their income on housing, a full-time worker making minimum wage in the state of Connecticut would only be able to afford an apartment priced at $944 per month, or would have to work about 70 hours per week to afford a standard one-bedroom apartment at the fair market rate, which is about $1,491. With the cost of available renting housing continuing to increase each year alongside increased cost of living for other basic needs like childcare, healthcare, groceries, fuel, oil, energy bills, all of the above, even families who are able to access a voucher from state and federal programs often still have a difficult time finding a place to live that's actually affordable to them. And this is really at the root of why we are gathered here this morning. By engaging in collaborative research projects with students from our neighboring universities, we better position ourselves to share up-to-date and relevant information with Connecticut residents and lawmakers about the realities and experiences that people are having in their communities when it comes to accessing an affordable home, and can be used to leverage real change that allows more people to access housing that is affordable to them. So with that, I'm super excited to invite in our panelists. We'll actually hear a little bit more from Dr. Smiler Adelaide before we bring in our panelists for today, to sort of set the stage for the conversation, but super excited to talk about the research and data collection that they've been exploring, and talking about the availability of housing, which meets that fair market rent and the rental standards used for the state and federal programs, like I mentioned earlier. So with that, I'm going to pass things over to Dr. Adelaide to get us started, and we'll go from there.
Well, thank you, Danielle. Um, and thank you all for joining us this morning. So the work presented today is part of a larger body of research we have been conducting on the access that tenant-assisted households have to communities across the state. The researchers are exploring an important question: what housing options are available to a household approved for a two-bedroom home through either the Federal Housing Choice Voucher Program, Section 8, or Connecticut's Rental Assistance Program. These are strong instruments of ensuring stability for families, particularly those who are low income. The findings from this work will be used to produce reports that we hope will help move the needle in how policymakers respond to affordable housing needs and encourage meaningful solutions. We also hope this research will inform future policy discussions and strengthen advocacy around housing choice, affordability, and stability. So this work is part of the partnership's broader mission to ensure that people have access to stable, affordable housing in communities of their choice. It also supports several of our policy goals, including increased funding for Connecticut's Rental Assistance Program, prioritizing affordable housing creation, removing barriers to diverse multifamily housing developments, and strengthening the Affordable Housing Appeals Act, or A30G. So today we'll hear preliminary findings from 3 projects that examined online rental housing listings across the state. We have presentations from Mingyu Zhang, Christopher Ferreira, Karina Thorpe, and Matt Russell, who conducted this project. And together, these studies kind of explore the rental market dynamics and payment standards in several towns across Connecticut. So today you also help us inform this research. Each presentation will conclude with a question prompt, and the responses we'll receive from you will be incorporated as the work moves forward. So with that in mind, before we hand it over to Christopher to start us off, we'll have a poll to help set the stage for the presentation that will follow. If you could take your time to respond, would deeply appreciate this. And this, of course, is also contributing to the work going forward. So thank you.
All right, I'm going to close the poll now so we can all see the responses. I think you can see how much it actually costs. About 57% of folks are saying in that 1,500 to 2,500 range. How much do you think it should cost? Folks are saying their preference would be majority for the 1,100 to 1,500 range. And majority of folks in the room today know someone who receives rental assistance. So very interesting results. Thank you so much for sharing. And let me pull my slides back up.
Okay.
The floor is yours.
All right. Thank you. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Christopher Ferreira, and today I'm going to be talking about the intersection of affordability and accessibility in affordable housing. Okay, let's get to the next one. Thank you. All right. So why does this matter? It matters because housing affordability is at an all-time crisis due to rising rental costs, high demand, low supply, and inequality. My hope is to shine a light on how affordability and accessibility intersect specifically between the towns of Bethel, Danbury, Richfield, Connecticut. Next slide, please. Thank you. All right, so for the duration, so for the duration of the presentation, I would like you to keep in mind how affordability index depends on income relative to the rental costs. The affordability doesn't necessarily mean accessibility. Also, rentals that meet the MAR standard or the maximum allowable rent, which we've explained earlier, and the fair market rent standards don't guarantee housing availability. Next slide, please. Thank you. So for the ethnic background and regional context, I've added the population and the ethnic demographic for Bethel, Danbury, and Richfield for your reference during the presentation, as it's vital to understand the difference in the population size between the towns and the ethnic demographic, which will help you understand the data analysis as we go on. As you can see, Danbury has a greater population and has fewer white residents and greater Black, Hispanic, and mixed residents than Bethel and Richfield. Next slide, please. In the regional household background, I want for you to keep in mind that the median income of those who live in Bethel, Danbury, and Richfield, and the median value of owner-occupied housing units, because the data that will be shown may seem counterintuitive due to the city of Richfield being known as a wealthy, affluent town with most of their population being homeowners. Next slide, please. So the listing data that I've collected was collected using public platforms such as Zillow and Apartment.com and the U.S. Consensus and Partnership with Strong Communities State of Housing 2026 to collect public research data as references to compile and use statistical analysis methods on Excel for this preliminary report to discuss average rental costs and how affordable and accessible the rentals may be. Next slide, please. So what you should take away from this chart of the compiled data is that the MAR for the two-bedroom is $2,600 for Danbury and Bethel and $2,750 for Richfield. I specifically collected these listings to fit the MAR standard. And just to kind of show here, if you look at where the rentals that fit the MAR standards, 34 for Danbury, 4 for Bethel, 1 for Richfield on Zillow, and the difference in Apartments.com is 32 for Danbury, 6 for Bethel, and 1 for Richfield. Next slide, please. So to start off with the data analysis, since we now know that there was about 39 properties covered by the MAR standards in total, here we can see the total overall rentals that were listed on Zillow and Apartments.com on the left here. Next to it on the right is the average rental costs from each town from the same data. Also, as a reminder, from the last slide, Richfield had one listing that was covered by the MAR standard. It may not be a true representation of the data. Slide 9, please. Here, I would like you to grasp your attention as data may be counterintuitive. Within my data analysis, I created an affordability index, which is the median income divided by the average rental costs, to show how much more income is relative to the rental costs available. As an example, Richfield, median's income was about, the median income earner was about 64 times more than the average rental costs. The reason why I'm picking on Richfield is to reiterate the population is made up of predominantly affluent and wealthy homeowners, which makes Richfield seem more affordable compared to, let's say, Danbury, which was the median income earner makes 35 times more than their average rental costs. Danbury is known to be of a mixed community from multiple backgrounds as depicted in slide 4. Next, the affordability index, I compared each town with each other to reflect how many times in each town more affordable than the other. As an example, Bethel is 80.89 times more affordable than Danbury due to a higher median income and lower average rental costs. Ridgefield seems to be more affordable due to the median income earner having higher yearly salary, which also may explain why there is only one property covered by the Department of Housing for the vouchers program. Next slide, please. Thank you. Here's where it starts to get a little interesting. The first graph here on the left, I originally called a supply ratio when really it's how many listings are available to rent compared to rentals that are covered by the MAR standard. As an example here, for every MAR eligible listing on Zillow, which I coded with the color blue, there is 5.75 listings that don't fit the MAR standard, which is probably the sorry, which is probably the is less accessible due to no government assistance. Next, the chart is the chart I labeled as the accessibility index, which the math as the inverse of the previous chart to show the percentage of how accessible it is each town based off of the 2-bedroom MAR eligible rentals divided by the total rentals available. For a better understanding, looking at the example below using the Zillow data for Danbury, Danbury is 15% accessible compared to the total units available. Next slide, please. Thank you. Here's the percent of rentals that have met the FMR standards. To clarify, all listings data I've collected were covered by the MAR standards originally. To better explain the graph by looking at the example below, this time we'll look at the mean. 79% of listings collected the FMR standards now. While these properties may meet the fair market value and maximum amount of rent covered by the Department of Housing voucher, it does not guarantee the availability. This is an area where I started to face some challenges in my research due to the findings' counterintuitive nature, which I will later clarify in my final report, but to touch base on its importance to the finalization of the data. When comparing both the affordability index and accessibility index, I noticed a pattern emerge. Using correlation analysis, the data indicates that the higher affordability index is associated with a lower accessibility index when based off of median income, rental availability, home prices, and average rental. Next slide, please. So here in my summary, to clarify based on this notion, it seems that Ridgefield is rated higher on the affordability index, but lower on the accessibility index, most likely due to the nature of its affluence. While Danbury and Bethel are lower on the affordability index, but higher on the accessibility index, due to more rentals available that is covered by financial housing support. This brings us back to the correlation factor, which is statistically represented by a Pearson R rating of a negative 0.79 or negative 0.9 between the affordability index and accessibility index, indicating that there's an inverse effect, right, in correlation period, meaning as affordability goes up, accessibility goes down, and vice versa, right? So now, due to the nature of the study, there are many confounding variables, which is suggested due to the limited sample I've collected. So far, this study indicates multiple implications: affordable housing shortages, increasing demand and competition, reflection of income inequality between towns, structural inequalities, and other barriers that voucher recipients may face, and more variables should be considered. Next slide, please. So here, my recommendation is to expand the sample as to get more of a more accurate representation of what is happening in the market and to study beyond the MAR standard. Other variables to be considered to investigate the accessibility for housing and look at other towns to compare the data. Also, in sociological research, there's this method of a theory that is called experience near that I've just recently learned, which is essentially the ethnographic qualitative research from personal experience. As a previous real estate agent with William Ravis in Newtown and Keller Williams, I've seen firsthand the trials and tribulations of finding an affordable home for my clients and see that it is important to gather voucher recipient real estate practitioners, housing policymakers, and landlords' experiences to tie the statistical data to real life experiences. Which brings us to my question two on the next slide. How have variables from the past shaped modern day housing policies, rental practices, and rental listings, which sustains implicit exclusionary limitations of affordable housing? Thank you.
Thanks so much, Chris. Appreciate all your early research and excited to see the final product once you get there. I'll leave this question up for just a second, and I believe Samila is also going to drop it in the chat, but encourage folks to respond to this question. Will hopefully help inform some of Chris's research and the direction of the remainder of your research for this project. But with that, to make the best use of our time, I do want to move us forward to our Trinity practitioners and researchers. And let me just get you pinned in here. And I will move us to the next slide. And you all are welcome to jump in and get started.
Fantastic. So my group consists of myself and Karina, and we were talking about housing affordability and these are our initial findings. Sadly, Mustafa could not be with us today, but he's with us in spirit, I'm sure. Next slide, please. Good. And just a quick introduction of what we were actually looking at. Our rental units were anything that were 2+ bedrooms, and looking at, as we've talked about before, the maximum allowable rent, the MAR, and then the FMR as well. Going through both Zillow and apartments.com to find the available units in a multitude of areas. The nine towns were selected within the greater Hartford area. Next slide. Sorry, next slide, please. Thank you. And then those towns are listed right here. So they're arranged in alphabetical order from our left side, but you could arrange them in any order that you chose, depending on how you wanted to view this data between property availability, what the MAR was in that particular area, and then FMR obviously is a state thing, goes throughout the entirety of Connecticut. But state towns were chosen based on their financial of the populace, along with the property availability. And so you can see we have a nice spread of information and of towns in our data set. Next slide. And then just the base initial findings that we had here. We'll go into explanation in just a second with Karina. But the initial findings are listed here on the screen with the total properties identified of 421. With the average number of bedrooms being 2, some with a little bit more, but nothing to take us off the solid number of 2. Average bathrooms 1.4 square feet, 1050, and then obviously continuing down the line with the rent, the security deposit, and then the percentage of listings that actually met the MAR, which, if I recall the numbers correctly off the top of my head, was 421 for the total and something around 242 for the actual MAR at that point. Next slide, please. And then now I'll kick it over to Karina.
Great, thank you. And apologies in advance if you hear some loud background noise. One of the cons of being a renter, they are doing lawn maintenance and there's nothing I can do about it. So apologies if you hear that. So one of the data points that we started by looking at was a square footage to rent comparison. And well, before we get into that, when we looked at our data, we kind of split it into 3 different categories based on availability within these areas. So we split into high availability towns, moderate availability towns, and low availability towns. So starting with our high availability towns, you can see here the red bars represent the rent advertised and the blue bars represent the square footage. So you can see there's not much of a variety in the square footage, but a bit of a variety in the overall rent. For the high availability towns, when we look at them all together, the average rent was about $19.76 and the average square footage was $10.64, meaning that renters in these towns pay about $1.86 per square footage. When we hop down to the moderate availability towns, the average rent altogether was $21.02 and the average square footage was $10.19. So in these towns, renters pay about $2.06 per square footage. And in these low availability towns, the average rent was $19.67. Average square footage was also $10.19, and renters pay about $1.93 per square footage. So you can see here that Although there is a bit of a variety in the average square footage, it doesn't quite keep up with the average of rent. Like there's a much bigger disparity between the average rents than there is with the average square footage. Next slide. So the next major data piece that we looked at was a security to rent comparison. We looked at them within these same three buckets as well. The red bars in these charts represent the security deposits listed, and the blue bars represented the rent advertised. One important thing to keep in mind here is that the data that we're looking at right now represents just the data that was available. So for instance, there were a lot of towns that while they had their rent advertised, they didn't have their security advertised. So we pulled those out when compiling this data in these charts, but that's something important to know that for a lot of renters going into inquiring about a rental, some of this information is not available. So when we look at the high availability towns, on average, security deposits are about 93% of the total rental cost. In moderate availability towns, it's about 102%. And in the low availability towns, it was 141%. And a big chunk of that is swayed by East Windsor, which, as you can see here, their average rent is $19.31, but their average security deposit was $33.75. So you can see there that at least in one of these areas, there's a very big jump between the security deposit and the rental costs. Next slide. And then we have it broken out here so you can kind of see all nine of the towns to see how much of what percentage of the security deposit is the rent to security deposit comparison. So again, you can see here that East Windsor, for example, it's 174% and Windsor is 164%. So in the Windsor area, you can see there that security deposits will be a lot higher than on average than, for instance, security deposits in a place like Rocky Hill. Next slide. And then another data point that we looked at were pets, because about 71% of Americans have pets. I know I have 2 cats and they're very important to me. So it's a very big factor when looking into housing, because a lot of people don't want to have to rehome their pets in order to have somewhere to live. So this data is looking at all of the towns combined. About 69% of the listings that we found allowed for pets. 25% didn't allow for pets and 6% didn't have it listed. So again, for some renters looking at these properties, it's not, they don't have that information that they need in order to make a decision upfront about whether they're going to spend their time applying for these rentals. And then we also have a comparison here of any sort of pet rent that is required in these various listings. Most of what we were able to find, they all kind of had we found like similar prices for this pet rent. So 20 of the listings we found listed a pet rent of $40 a month. 12 of them listed a pet rent of $50 a month, and 36 listed $80 a month. But then again, when we look at the vast majority of the listings, we find that 99 of them did not have pet rent listed, but they also didn't say that they don't charge pet rent. So again, another piece of information that renters don't have in order to make a decision upfront. Next slide.
And then we get into some of the analysis portions of it here. So, for the FMR standard, is as I've been doing my research, shows that 40% of the housing in the area is supposed to meet that standard, and that standard of 40% was not met from the selected towns. It actually came out to lower than that 40%. Now, this could be just a be very, very clear and upfront. It could be selection bias based on the towns that we had. If we grouped all together, that number could show differently. But from the towns that were selected, the number that the FMR actually met was lower than the 40%. There was only a single town that actually met that standard, and that was East Hartford, and that was into, I want to say it was in the 80% at that point. So that was a very shocking thing, personally for me, to see. And then the other one was actually from a slide that was about two slides back here, that rent and security deposit are actually inversely correlated. What that actually means is as the rent is higher, the security percentage, that should read security percentage, not deposit, the security percentage that is needed is actually lower. So to put that in layman's terms, the lower that the rent is, that higher the percentage is. So for $1,000 rent, that security deposit is sitting around the $2,000 range. However, as we get into the 2,500 range and for that rent, the security deposit actually showed lower into the somewhere of the 2,000 to 2,200. So while that deposit may remain relatively similar, the percentage based on the rent is actually a lot less. And that impacts a lot of, especially lower income families that, oh, this is, I can afford this rent, but I can't afford this deposit at that point. Into the next slide, please. And then we get into our conclusion, which is what do we draw from these findings? And what we're seeing is that there is a gap between the goals and then the realities of what housing policy is happening right here between we want to help people, but we're not seeing that same, maybe that same help play through in the actual outcomes. And then we talk about ghettoization through consequences, not policy, right? If we're talking 50, 60, plus years ago, maybe less, redlining, steering, all these types of things that were intentionally done to put people in different boxes. Maybe we don't see that in the law anymore, but we do see that in the consequences and the outcomes of the law that is still in place. Now, intentionality is a separate question from that. That is not included, obviously, in this study. And then I refer back to that previous statement about how security deposit is different from rent with those high upfront costs. Especially, it seems how maybe the lesser income is being hit a lot harder with that upfront cost rather than the higher number on that rent. And then uneven geographic distribution, right? If we were to look back into those slides, we could see how the differences show between higher income neighborhoods versus lower income neighborhoods, the availability versus not. And then not everything is on a level playing field. Matter of fact, it's quite uneven at that point. So high availability versus financial and everything else that goes right along with it. So a lot of things to continue to do research on. No, that was actually a perfect segue right there. And then it goes to our question, which is to you guys as a group. And I would love to see this, like we've said before in the chat, and just a very short blurb of based on your personal experience, what is a data point that should be included in this report? We had talked about some things like wait times. A big one is were you able to get your security deposit back? That one sticks out to me for especially, again, lower income, high upfront costs. If they can't get that deposit back, that's going to stop them from moving on to another place. So this is just for you guys as a personal experience. What is something you'd like to see in a report of this nature in the future? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Matthew and Karina. Appreciate your research and work on this. We shared the question in the chat, it looks like, so please respond to this one and the other one. And we'll also have a little bit of time at the end for Q&A to dialogue with some of our presenters today. So if you have other questions about the research or anything you'd like to see it expand on, if they have the capacity for that, we'd like to at least have that dialogue with you all. But with that, I'm going to pass it over to Mingyu to share some of their research out of Yale.
Hello, everyone. Is it good that everyone can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sounds good. All right. Thank you so much for being here today. And today I would like to share some of my findings on the New Haven rental affordability here. And the focus of my research is on the affordability beyond rent, actually, including deposits and other utility fees. So, next slide, please. Okay, sounds good. All right, thank you. On this very first slide, the main point I want to highlight is that the affordability rates here I'm talking about is the affordability rate of the advertised rents that are below the MAR or the FMR standard. So just to want to point that out first. And we can see that affordability looks very different depending on whether we are only look at the advertised rent or whether we think about what a renter would actually need to move in. So on Zillow, the vast majority of listings in our sample looks affordable by the MAR or the FMR standard, which we can see is at 95.6% and at 86.6%. However, the picture drastically changes once we start thinking about practical affordability. And here, I mean that not just rent, but also things like security deposits and whether utilities are included. And we can see that the percentage of affordable rates actually drastically dropped to 7.5% on Zillow. So this is a major finding of my research. And also on apartments.com, the affordable share is much lower from the start, and it drops even more once we use the broader definition. So the takeaway here is that rent alone can make the market looks much more affordable than it actually is in real practice. Can we move on to the next slide? Yep, sounds good. So, and this slide gets into why that cap exists. And there are three major issues. One is the upfront cost are a real barrier. And two, missing data hides the real cost. And three, platform choice changes the whole story. So going to the first point, even when a unit actually meets the monthly affordability threshold, the renter may still need even like 2 or even 3 months of cash upfront once the security deposit is actually included. So another issue is that incomplete information. In many listings, deposit amounts are actually missing, and the utility coverage is either like unclear or not disclosed at all. And that makes it particularly hard to judge whether a unit is actually accessible. And the last point being that the difference between platforms. So I used two platforms during my research, and Zillow and Apartments.com seem to capture somewhat different segments of the rental market, and that leads to a very different affordability estimates. So overall, the data set suggests that the challenge is not just whether the rent is below the benchmark, but whether the full cost and term of success access make the unit realistically achievable. Next slide, please. All right. So in the end, I do have a question for the audience as well. It's quite similar to what Trinity guys had. So my question is, have you seen examples where payment standards like FMR or MAR look adequate on paper, but available listings still do not match what renters actually need? And what data would actually help that gap more clearly? Thank you.
Thank you, Mingyu. All right, I'm going to bring in all of our presenters today. Thank you so much for sharing your research. I know this is your preliminary findings, so not all the way completed yet, but really excited to bring you into the conversation and to hear from our audience. If you all have any questions, you're welcome to raise your hand and we can have a dialogue that way. You're welcome to drop it in the chat and we can have a dialogue that way as well. So yeah, feel free to jump in and let's have a conversation. Amy, I see your hand up. Jump on in.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for your presentations. Great job. In thinking about the value or estimated cost of what it takes to actually move into an apartment, how did you, what were you thinking of, and how did you come up with the numbers for that? What type of data were you using? Besides, I saw the security deposit, but in terms of um, how do we calculate those costs and then think about in our advocacy and policy, um, trying to make things more accessible and affordable through data? What do we look at to determine that?
Well, one piece of data that we looked at that we didn't include in this presentation were overall miscellaneous fees. So things like um, uh, uh, having to pay for like certain amenities, having to pay for parking, things like that. I think that's a really important thing that a lot of people don't necessarily think about until they're there signing their lease and they suddenly see that they have all these additional fees that they didn't necessarily think about. And also, someone touched on this, but utilities as well. Um, and not just whether the utilities are covered or not, but if these utilities have, for instance, like a set cost. So, for instance, for me in the apartment I live in, I pay a certain amount each month for water, right? And so that might impact my ability to pay rent if I know that there's a set cost that I'm paying versus if it's based on usage or something like that. So those are two really important things that we also looked at and we'll be diving into more as we go through our research.
That's really helpful. And you mentioned the pet fees too, which is, and there is um, legislation pending, maybe I should know this, but in our current legislative session around fees and I know there is an ability if you do have um, lots of or excessive or hard to meet fees, you can bring those to a fair rent commission if it exists to challenge that. But thinking about it before you even move in, it would be interesting to see, what a general calculation of affordability would is. So thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, and sorry, just to add to that, when we looked at pet fees, we only looked at monthly pet rent. We in our presentation, in our larger research, we have things, for instance, like the non-refundable pet fees, which also, add a lot to these
Hmm.
upfront costs.
Yeah, it got somewhere into the $400 and $500 range at that point.
Hmm.
Wow.
Were I have a quick question about the pet rents. Was it a month? Was it always a monthly fee, or was it sometimes annual? Um, Curious what came up in your research.
I personally did not think, Karina, you can correct me if on your side of it. I did not see any annual fees. I only saw initial deposit, and monthly rent at that time, or obviously not listed. Karina, did you find anything different?
Nope, that's what I found.
And then for the hidden cost, the application fees. Oh, not sure if you guys can hear my dogs. Oh,
You're
okay,
good.
I hope
good.
you're paying your
Yeah,
fee on your dog. Just kidding.
yeah. There were application fees as well. Some I didn't find anything higher than something like $45. Some were 27, some 35. But there were for sure application fees as well.
Thank you. Christine, I see your hand up. Jump on in.
Thank you. These were such great presentations. I feel like I'm not somebody who studies housing a lot, and I feel like I just learned so much from all of you. So I really appreciate these presentations. Um, And I think that one of the things that I'm beginning to get curious about is this idea of accessibility and all of the valences of accessibility. And in particular, because all of you were really focused on looking at Zillow and apartments.com. I wonder whether there's some part of accessibility that also has to do not economically, not thinking about it economically, but thinking about the interfaces themselves. And I'm just thinking about, are there populations that you feel like are, hindered from finding affordable apartments because these interfaces are difficult to navigate, or they're asking you to apply for these apartments through the interface, or yeah, I began to think about that. So I'm just curious as to whether or not that feels like a piece of the data collection for anybody. Thanks.
I think I can speak on that. So a number of the interns brought this up when we were originally planning this and talked about how well, many people don't, find their housing through these means. And so for now in this project, maybe going forward, we'll look at that as well. But a huge section of the population tend to go online to look for housing. And we know that there are some houses that don't even go online. Like many people find housing by their friends or someone kind of like recommends them or whatever the case may be. We haven't captured that here, but that was definitely in discussion and it's something we're thinking through how to like capture that in data as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks again, Christine.
Of course.
I
Yeah.
also have something to say about that as well. Just due to my experience as a real estate agent back in the day, I remember most of my clients would look at Zillow just to see what is out there, but the data wasn't entirely accurate from my experience from Zillow and apartments.com. There was some information that was put out there, but the issue is that some real estate agents have about, I think, 24 to 48 hours to update their listings for it to be accurate. And unfortunately, that's not always the case. And most individuals and older individuals, and potentially even people from different demographics, they usually go to somebody they rely on more than something that's online. So they like that interpersonal connection. So they're always going to go to a real estate agent who is going to do that job. And that's also something I think is vital for accessibility because through my experience as a real estate agent, I've noticed that there are agents that guide their clients to specific regions, specific areas, specific locations, either for financial gain or not. It just depends on that situation. As well, I also wanted to add into my data specifically was credit score. I think credit score was something that was vital for accessibility as well. When I looked at through some of the listings, a lot of them either it was like maybe like 30%, I'm gonna say roughly, not accurate, but that asked for a credit score. Most of them were always set 650 to 700 plus, which makes it very difficult to find a property in these trying times, especially in Danbury. Danbury has a huge community, minority community, and most likely they probably don't have 650 credit score or a credit score at all, and that's what makes it challenging. So,
Can I ask a quick follow-up on that?
mhm.
With the real estate, using a real estate agent, who pays the real estate agent in the state of Connecticut? Like, is it
So
the
you
renter or
Yeah, so usually it's the seller that pays it.
okay,
You negotiate up front.
or the
So
rent, the person who is leasing the apartment?
yeah, this is where I
Hmm.
had a little bit of a challenge because I didn't like to charge the buyers personally. I felt like it didn't feel right. But if the seller is the one selling it, you're representing, yes, you could be a buyer agent and a seller's agent or a renter's agent, right? And so like it's very difficult to work with the buyer just due to the aspect of it depends if it's a seller's market or a buyer's market, you know, and so that's where it becomes a little challenging. With the sellers, you have you pretty much have commission off the bat if you sell the property. Either if you find a buyer as well, you get pretty much I think 6%. You negotiate between like 4 and 6% is the average in Connecticut, I believe. So when I sold my first property, I gained 3%, which at the time was like $3,000 out of my commission. I gained like 2,800 for that. And then for my first rental, I got half of that. So I got about 1,000 from it, you know, and so it changes a bit with those variations. So,
Thank you.
no problem.
Take a quick pause and see if there are any other questions from our audience members. There's some really good thoughts happening in the chat, so I'll encourage our presenters to go check those out if you haven't already. Jared, jump on in.
Sure, thanks. Can you hear me? So one of the things that I found really helpful and interesting in the partnerships, like State of Housing in Connecticut 2025 report specific to rental housing was like the graphs that I think are from like the National Low Income Housing Coalition showing like the actual wage a renter would need to make in order to afford rent in certain places. And I'm wondering, given like the discussion of all these kind of hidden fees, if kind of data like that showing like, okay, in this particular community, you need to make X amount of dollars to afford rent here. Do those studies include these hidden fees? Is there a way for them to even include those hidden fees? Or are they literally just going based on here's the advertised rent and here's the wage you need to make that? Because obviously there's going to be a discrepancy there. And based on what everyone is saying here, there's a lot of gaps in the data that are just not available to renters to see when it comes to those fees. So I'm wondering just if anyone knows, is there a way to even quantify that? Can you repeat the question again? I think I do have an answer. Sure, just like a matter of, you know, is the data that shows like the discrepancy between wages that renters must earn in order to actually afford rent, when we're saying that, does that include just the rent alone, or does it include rent plus these additional fees that you all found are often kind of on top of what you would need to actually move into and afford?
Thanks for asking that question. I think I'll have to like look into this more, but I think that is calculated using the ACS, and so that is gross rent, which technically should include utilities, but not all these other extra fees. I don't think that's, especially where the fees are not annual. So if it's an annual thing that you pay, then that should be counted in. But if it's like the one-time moving fees or pet deposit and things like that, or security deposit, those are not included in that calculation. Anyways, hopefully
I was actually thinking about doing this for my final project as well for the aspect of accessibility. Just due to the aspect that when I was looking through these listings, as even like I mentioned before, as a previous real estate agent, we're required by law to update public listings at all times, essentially. And so I was noticing that discrepancy while I was looking through the data, when I was collecting the data. And I noticed that a lot of them, they showed utilities, but they didn't show how much, or are they being covered, or are they not being covered with the rent costs as well. So that was something I wanted to take a look at to see, like, for those hidden costs, like how many are not updating their listings to show these hidden costs. You know, I remember Matthew and Karina touched base on it a bit, but it is a very big concern that these listings, like, because I could see as an individual who it wants to find property, they see something, and like sometimes people take things for face value. They see something in the listing, they're like, oh my God, like this property is only $2,000 or 1,500 or whatever. And then they go in person and then they get, you know, like blown up in the face. So we're showing that, oh my God, now I have to pay $6,000 in security deposits, the application fee, this, and that, you know, and there's nothing in face value. And people like to rely on these platforms way too much, in my opinion. I mean, I've had experience with Zillow. Even in the past, you could tell Zillow had their own problems, you know. I mean, they let go what like half of their like workforce because they bought multiple properties just to resell it. I mean, it doesn't really make sense. These platforms are, to be honest, inefficient, to be honest. I mean, that's all I have to say.
Chris, it sounds like you have your next research project lined up from that.
Oh, I have way too much confounding variables that I looked at, and so
And just to at least chip in from our group as well, absolutely agreement across the board here. The hidden fees are hidden for a reason. If you were to look at all the different factors, the different columns that we could have had, that could have just made it a jumbled mess between pet deposit, application fee. We counted who did utilities, who didn't, which utilities. Some included water, some included heat. It depended if they were electric or were they gas. And then now you got to look at. There were so many things that could have changed what percentages were and what security. Yes, difficult, basically.
Yeah, and to add on to that, Zillow now has a new feature where they'll show you like the total cost of living somewhere, not just the rent. So, but again, that's very misleading because a lot of places don't have certain fees listed. And so there's no way for a person to really know if that number is accurate or not, right? Because it's telling you this includes all the fees, this includes rent, this is how much per month it's gonna cost you to live here. But because there is an overall lack of transparency with a lot of these different fees, that can be very misleading to people who think that they have finally found something that fits within their budget. And then they go to the place, they tour, they talk to the agent, and then they find out that actually that isn't accurate. So I think that also, there needs to be some pressure put on these platforms to make sure that, that these listings are accurate and transparent, especially if they're going to be, telling you that this is how much you'll be paying. So I think there needs to be some pressure put on these platforms to do better.
Yeah. Well,
So
thank you all
also,
so much. Oh, sorry. Did you want to add something real quick?
I just, uh, yeah, I kind of wanted to say too, touch base on what Karina said is I believe these platforms should be treated like real estate agents as well. I mean, they have a little wiggle room because they're not really a real estate agent. They're like a multi-listing service, and I'm essentially another form of MLS without being one. They pretty much all they do, they're the middleman, right? They connect the data from the MLS from agents who have that connection and then just put it on for the public use. But that's also a problem. If I feel like if they're gonna have these companies for real estate, they're gonna have to be considered as a real estate agent themselves. Like they have to be considered an agency in order for these problems to be solved. It's the only other way I could see, you know. So
Yeah. Well, thank you all so much. We're actually 1 minute over time, so if you have to jump, that's totally fine. But so appreciative of all the work you've done across the state, and let us know if you want to come back and do a follow-up once you've completed your research. We're happy to host you all. But thank you for your time, and just so folks are aware, these slides will be shared out as well, so you'll have this information to digest a little bit more later. And yeah, thanks so much, and we'll see you all again soon, I'm sure. Have a wonderful Friday, everyone.